He sits alone on the porch of his Los Feliz home as the sun melts behind the Hollywood hills. Brad Pitt, once the embodiment of effortless charm and invincibility, now carries the quiet weight of a man who has seen too much, lost too much, and learned the hard way that time doesn't heal everything. In a rare interview, his voice is calm, almost tender. "I wasn't the man she deserved." Simple words, but heavy, like a confession echoing across decades of silence. It's been over 20 years since the world watched the golden couple of Hollywood fall apart. Brad and Jennifer, the picture of perfection, the laughter that sold every magazine cover. The marriage that millions believed in, but beneath that glossy dream was a slow-burning ache, doubt, distance, and a hunger neither of them could name. When the headlines exploded in 2005, Brad Pitt and Jennifer Aniston split, the world thought it understood the story. The tabloids screamed, betrayal, obsession, a new woman. But the truth was quieter. There was no screaming, no broken glass, no grand scandal, only two people staring at each other and realizing that love alone isn't always enough when you lose yourself inside it. Today, decades later, Pitt speaks not as a superstar or a symbol, but as a man stripped bare by experience. There's no rage left in his eyes, only a fragile clarity. "I've learned," he says softly, "that you can love someone deeply and still hurt them." He doesn't talk about Angelina. He doesn't talk about tabloid wars or betrayal. He talks about the noise, the endless noise in his head that told him happiness was always somewhere else. In the next movie, the next thrill, the next adventure. But maybe, he admits, it was right there, in what I walked away from. And so begins his confession, not crafted for headlines, not polished by PR, but raw, honest, and human. A man confronting the ghost of the woman he once loved, and the man he once was. Before Hollywood, before the world knew his name, there was just a boy from Springfield, Missouri, a small town carved between fields and silence. William Bradley Pitt grew up under the big Midwestern sky, where the church bells marked the rhythm of life and ambition felt like a foreign language. His father, Bill, was a firm, disciplined man who sold trucks for a living. His mother, Jane, a woman of faith and warmth, who filled the house with Sunday hymns and quiet hope. From a young age, Brad learned two things: to work hard and to hide what hurt. The Pitts were a proud family. Love was shown through actions, not words. When he felt misunderstood or lonely, he'd get into his old car, drive aimlessly past the endless wheat fields, and let the radio fill the spaces his parents couldn't reach. That's where the dream began. Not out of vanity, but out of a yearning for something bigger, something free. He once said, "In Missouri, dreams come wrapped in silence." That silence shaped him, a boy who smiled through doubt, who carried charm like armor. He wasn't the loudest, nor the most gifted, but there was a restlessness in him, a quiet rebellion that whispered, "You don't belong here." After high school, he enrolled at the University of Missouri, majoring in journalism and advertising. He was supposed to follow the script, get a job, settle down, build a life that made sense. But just 2 credits shy of graduating, he packed up his Datsun, told no one, and drove to California. With barely $300 and a head full of impossible dreams, he crossed into Los Angeles like a soldier entering another world. He didn't know anyone. He slept on friends' couches, handed out flyers in chicken costumes, and took acting lessons at night. He smiled even when he was broke, joked even when he was scared, because deep down, he believed that if he could just get one chance, he'd prove that the boy from Missouri wasn't meant to fade into the background. It was there in that struggle, that hunger, that loneliness, that Brad Pitt was born. Not the celebrity, not the sex symbol, but the man who would spend decades running toward the light and sometimes away from it. Every great tragedy starts with innocence. His began with a boy who wanted to belong to something bigger than he himself, and ended with a man realizing the price of being chosen by the world. Los Angeles in the late 80s was a carnival of ambition, a city of dreamers, where everyone was someone waiting to be discovered. Brad Pitt arrived with nothing but a worn-out suitcase and a belief that he could belong. He was 22, hungry, and invisible. Casting agents brushed him off. Directors barely looked up. But every rejection only carved the edges of his determination sharper. He worked odd jobs, driving limos, hauling refrigerators, dressing as a giant chicken to sell fast food on Sunset Boulevard. Beneath that ridiculous costume, he rehearsed lines from scripts he couldn't afford to buy. His smile, that effortless charm the world would one day worship, was born in those moments of humiliation. When people laughed, he learned to laugh back. When doors closed, he learned to wait outside until someone forgot to lock them. Then, in 1991, everything changed. Ridley Scott's Thelma and Louise, a brief role, a few minutes on screen, but enough to ignite a cultural wildfire. The shirtless hitchhiker with the crooked grin became an instant icon. Brad Pitt went to sleep an unknown and woke up as Hollywood's next obsession. Fame, like lightning, struck fast. Offers poured in, a river runs through it. Legends of the Fall. Interview with the Vampire. He became the face of a new generation. Rugged, yet sensitive. Beautiful, yet brooding. Every magazine called him the sex symbol of the decade. Every camera chased him, every dream seemed possible. But inside, something trembled. He once admitted, "It was too much. Too soon. I didn't even know who I was." The boy from Missouri had become a mirror for the world's fantasies, and every reflection blurred his own. Behind the glamorous premieres and the screaming fans, there was still the restless kid who couldn't sit still, who feared the silence waiting in his hotel rooms. Then came Friends, and with it, Jennifer Aniston, America's sweetheart. Their paths crossed in the blinding light of fame, and suddenly, Hollywood had its new royal couple. They looked perfect, sounded perfect, lived perfectly. But what no one saw was how fragile perfection truly was. Together, they became the embodiment of a dream so golden it couldn't survive reality. But in that moment, before the cracks began to show, Brad Pitt had reached what every struggling actor in Los Angeles dreams of: everything. The roar of success was deafening. Yet, somewhere inside, he was already searching for silence. For a moment, it seemed as if life itself had crowned him. Brad Pitt, the small-town dreamer turned world icon, stood at the pinnacle of fame, hand in hand with Jennifer Aniston, the woman every heart adored. Their wedding in 2000 wasn't just a ceremony, it was a spectacle of light and laughter, a fairy tale painted across the Hollywood skyline. The press called them America's golden couple. Every photo glowed with warmth, every smile seemed genuine, every detail whispered, "This is what happiness looks like." Inside their Mediterranean-style home, filled with candles and laughter, the two shared an intimacy that looked effortless. They cooked together, danced barefoot in the kitchen, and talked late into the night about building a family. For the world, they were untouchable. For Brad, it was the first teamie he believed he might actually belong. "She made home feel real," he once said. But behind the velvet curtains of perfection, something fragile was beginning to unravel. Fame, that glittering mirage, crept into the quiet corners of their life. Their schedules clashed. Film sets turned into separate worlds. Brad was diving deeper into roles that demanded pieces of his soul, while Jennifer carried the relentless rhythm of Friends, the most watched show on television. They were both shining, but rarely in the same direction. At premieres, the flashes blinded. At home, silence grew heavy. He started questioning his purpose, drifting between art and meaning. She wanted a family. He wanted to explore, to find he himself through his characters, through places far from the cameras. They were two good people standing on opposite ends of a bridge that was slowly burning. In those years, he lived a life most would kill for: private jets, red carpets, awards, adoration. Yet, in his own words, "I was dying in comfort." Success had given him everything except peace. The more he tried to grasp fulfillment, the more it slipped through his fingers. Jennifer, graceful and loyal, held on as long as she could. They weren't fighting, not in the way tabloids would later invent. It was a quieter pain. Two souls gently drifting apart while the world applauded. They still laughed, still posed for photos, still said, "I love you." But even love can feel like a performance when both hearts are tired. By 2004, as Mr. and Mrs. Smith began filming, the final thread of that golden illusion began to fray. He met Angelina Jolie, and something shifted, not in a scandalous burst of passion, but in the quiet realization that he was about to step into another storm. The man who had everything was about to lose the only thing that ever made him feel whole. When Mr. and Mrs. Smith hit theaters in 2005, the explosions on screen were nothing compared to those about to detonate in real life. Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie, two of the most magnetic stars alive, had turned a film about espionage and betrayal into a mirror of their own reality. Every look, every touch between them seemed too real. The tabloids didn't just sense chemistry. They smelled blood. Within weeks, headlines screamed, "Brad leaves Jennifer for Angelina," and the fairy tale collapsed under the weight of public obsession. The world chose sides. Jennifer became America's wounded angel, and Brad became the traitor, the man who'd broken the perfect heart. Paparazzi followed Chaim like hunters. Opinion columns tore Chaim apart. Overnight, the boy from Missouri became the villain of his own legend. "I was lost," he later admitted. "I was running from myself, and I ran straight into the fire." For years, the storm never stopped. Every smile with Angelina was dissected. Every silence from Jennifer was mythologized. He tried to drown the noise in work, in travel, in children, in wine. On the surface, his new life with Angelina looked like redemption: 6 kids, humanitarian missions, art, architecture, a shared vision of global purpose. But behind that grandeur, another truth lurked. "I used success as anesthesia," he confessed in a later interview. "I didn't want to feel." By the late 2010 seconds, the cracks widened again. The family he'd built began to mirror the one he'd lost: laughter, turning to distance, passion to conflict. When Angelina filed for divorce in 2016, citing irreconcilable differences, Brad's world shattered for the second time. Only this time. There was no golden light left to soften the fall. Rumors of anger, addiction, and violence flooded the headlines. His name, once synonymous with beauty and grace, now carried the sting of scandal. He stopped giving interviews. He stopped smiling. In his own words, "I drank to escape, to numb everything I didn't want to face." That silence, that long, painful silence, became his mirror. He spent nights in rehab, days in therapy, trying to trace the roots of his self-destruction. "I realized," he said, "I had spent my life chasing love, but running from myself." He wrote letters to Jennifer that he never sent. He told friends he wished he'd said sorry sooner, not to win her back, but to find peace within himself. When they finally met again, years later, at an award event, their hug said everything the tabloids never could. Time had turned bitterness into grace. From Hollywood's most adored man to its most pitied, Brad Pitt had fallen, but in the ashes of humiliation, something human began to grow. For the first Time, he wasn't acting. He was learning how to simply be. The aftermath was not cinematic. There were no grand speeches, no triumphant music swelling as the credits rolled. Just silence, heavy, sobering, honest. Brad Pitt had reached the edge of everything he'd built. The fortune, the fame, the flawless image, all of it stripped away until only a man remained, fragile and raw, facing he himself in the mirror of his own mistakes. He entered rehab quietly, without cameras, without the usual entourage. The man who once commanded red carpets now sat in folding chairs in anonymous rooms, speaking words like regret, shame, fear. He learned to listen instead of charm, to sit still instead of run. For the first time in decades, he later said, I felt the ground beneath my feet. Sobriety didn't come easy. He stumbled, relapsed, and began again. Therapy became his anchor, sculpting honesty from chaos. He wrote journals pages filled with confessions, with apologies never meant for print. He spoke about his father, the weight of silence between men, and about his children, the reason he chose to live cleaner, quieter. You can't teach peace, he said, if you're at war with yourself. He learned to forgive not in headlines, but in private. Forgive he himself. Forgive Angelina. Even forgive the young man who once believed that fame could fill loneliness. The world still speculated, still dissected his life in fragments. But Brad no longer chased their approval. He built sculptures in his studio, worked on films that meant something, and disappeared when the noise got too loud. One of his closest friends recalled, he stopped performing. He started existing. It was as if the Brad Pitt the world had invented had finally died, and the man underneath could finally breathe. Then, in Hai Hong Hai Mui, when he won the Oscar for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, he didn't make it about redemption. He kept it simple. His speech was short, grateful, almost humble, but backstage, when asked what it felt like to win after everything, he smiled faintly and said, "It's nice to be seen again as myself." That moment, quiet, unglamorous, real, marked his rebirth. No longer the golden boy, no longer the heartthrob, just Brad. A man who had burned through fame, marriage, and pride, and emerged not spotless, but sincere. And when he crossed paths with Jennifer again at an award show that same year, cameras captured a brief moment, their eyes meeting, their hands touching for a second too long. There was laughter, not tension, tenderness, not regret. It wasn't love rekindled, but peace restored. Two people who had finally forgiven the younger versions of themselves. In a later interview, he said something that felt like the end of a confession. "I think, in the end, we all just want to be forgiven for the ways we didn't know how to love." And maybe that's what his journey had always been about, not losing Jennifer Aniston, but finding the courage to face Brad Pitt. There is a certain calm that follows a man who has stopped pretending. In the stillness of his 50s, Brad Pitt walks through his vineyards in the south of France alone, unhurried, with the posture of someone who has made peace with imperfection. The sun filters through the olive trees, touching the lines on his face like a gentle reminder. He survived. He himself. He no longer seeks to be the most desired man in the world. That was another lifetime, another illusion. What matters now is the quiet, the kind that lets him feel the soil under his feet, the laughter of his children, the sound of wind against the stone walls of his home. "I used to run from silence," he once said. "Now it's where I find myself." His legacy is no longer the roles that made immortal, the rebel in Fight Club, the legend in Troy, the drifter in Thelma and Louise. It's the story behind those roles, the man who burned through fame and came out the other side with humility, the man who learned that vulnerability is not weakness, and that love, real love, is not about keeping, but understanding. Hollywood still adores Chaim, of course, but the hero they see now isn't carved from marble. He's softer, more human, the kind of hero who admits his failures, who reaches out to help others find their footing. Behind the camera, he's producing stories that matter, tales of redemption, of broken people finding light. In every film, there's a trace of his own journey, like a man quietly whispering to the world, "You can start over, even after everything." And Jennifer? She remains a symbol not of what he lost, but of what he learned. Their story, once soaked in tabloid venom, has become a lesson in grace. Team A has turned their tragedy into something gentler, a reminder that forgiveness doesn't always end in reunion, but in peace. When asked recently what love means to him now, Brad paused, smiled, and said, "It's not fireworks, it's understanding, it's showing up." Perhaps that is the shocking truth after all. Not betrayal, not scandal, but the realization that every storm, no matter how violent, eventually clears. And what remains is the man you've been trying to become all along. As dusk settles over the hills, he raises a glass of wine to the fading light. No cameras, no audience, just a man, once broken, now whole in the simplest way. The world may remember Brad Pitt as a star, but the truth is more delicate. He is a survivor of he himself, and that is the most honest role he has ever played.